Tehran, shaken by its first terror attack in decades. Daesh claims responsibility as Iran points the finger at Saudi Arabia and the U.S. How will it impact a region in turmoil? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is the terror attack on Iran. Well, terrorist attacks have hit Iran at two of its most symbolic sites. It all unfolded as several armed assailants launched coordinated assaults on the parliament building and the mausoleum of Ayatollah Khomeini, founder of the Islamic Republic. Bombs exploded, gunfights ensued, and in the end, 13 people were dead and dozens more were injured. Daesh has claimed responsibility, its first attack in the country. Now, it comes just days after a major shakeup in the Gulf as several GCC countries cut diplomatic ties with Qatar for allegedly cozying up to Iran. Yvette McCullough has more.
Twin attacks in Iran's capital. The most serious case of terrorism in Tehran in decades. Gunmen stormed the parliament building while it was in session. The attack lasted several hours, with people desperately escaping out of windows. Another attack happened just 30 kilometers away, at the mausoleum of the Islamic Republic's founder, Ayatollah Khomeini. Iranian officials say they foiled a third attack. Daesh claimed responsibility in what is its first assault inside Iran and carried out by Iranian nationals. Iran's supreme leader tried to downplay the incidents. But these attacks have raised concern about cracks in Iranian security, with questions over how these attackers were so easily able to hit such sensitive and symbolic targets. The attack could bring into question Iran's support for Bashar al-Assad in Syria's war, viewed by some Iranians as a fight with few benefits, costing too many Iranian lives, and now potentially bringing conflict back home. These attacks come days after the region was engulfed in unprecedented tension. Earlier this week, 8 countries and Libya's eastern-based government severed diplomatic ties with Qatar, accusing it of supporting terrorism and of trying to destabilize the region, something Qatar denies. Qatar's GCC allies also accused it of supporting Iran. This followed US President Donald Trump's meeting with GCC leaders in Riyadh last month, where Iran was aggressively criticized for what they said is state funding of terrorism. But the Iranian Revolutionary Guard has pointed the finger at Saudi Arabia, saying it's supporting the terrorist network that carried out these attacks, and it has questioned the timing.
رئیس جمهور آمریکا در یک نظام قبیله‌ای عقب مانده منحط محض میسته در کنار رئیس قبیله رقص شمشیر میکند اون وقت 40 میلیون رأی ملت ایران در یک انتخابات آزاد ایراد میگیره.
In a statement, Trump said he prayed for the victims of the Tehran attacks, but added that states that sponsor terrorism risk falling victim to the evil they promote. The Iranian foreign minister responded, tweeting repugnant White House statement in Senate sanctions as Iranians counter terror backed by US clients. Iranian people reject such US claims of friendship. How will this attack on Iranian soil impact developments far beyond its borders? And with the chaos gripping the region, will this end up driving Tehran and Doha closer together? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, to further discuss the attack on Iran and its implications, I'm joined here in the studio by TRT World's editor-at-large, Ahmed Al-Burai. From Washington, D.C., Ali Alfone. He is a senior fellow with the Atlantic Council. And from Tehran, Fouad Izzadi. He is a lecturer at the University of Tehran. Thanks all so much for joining us. Let me begin with Fouad then. You are there. Help us understand, if you can, why Iranian Daesh extremists would perpetuate this attack now in Iran against fellow Iranians, what are their ultimate goals in the country?
Well, as you know, the mentality of Wahhabis is they don't have any problem killing citizens of their own countries or even their neighbors or even their family members. The Wahhabi mentality allows people to kill without much justification. So the fact that these people are killing citizens of Iran is not a surprise. They have been doing this in Syria and Iraq and other places for many years now. And in fact, Iran has been immune for many years. This is the first terrorist attack we have had in Tehran in more than 30 years. They have engaged in some terrorist activities in towns and villages near the border, but nothing in Tehran. And why they do this? Because they are Wahhabis, because they are following the teachings that come from Saudi Arabia, and these teachings tell its followers to kill innocent Muslims without any problem.
Okay, Ali, I'd like to know your thoughts on that. Are these Wahhabists that are taking direction from Saudi Arabia, or are these Daesh extremists that have a particular agenda in Iran?
For some time, we have seen Daesh produce Persian language propaganda videos trying to target the Sunni community within Iran. 9% of Iran's population is Sunni. They are not only belonging to a religious sectarian minority, but they also belong to ethnic minorities. It is the Kurds in Iran, Arabs, Baluchis, and Turkmens. And Daesh has tried to mobilize them through Persian language propaganda videos. And most unfortunately, some of the propaganda resonates with the Iranian Sunni community. They live in areas distant from Tehran, periphery areas. They suffer from poverty, underdevelopment, and some of them end up answering the call of Daesh, and this is very, very unfortunate. The way to solve this issue from Iranian perspective is not only by having security measures, because security does not solve all the problems. What is needed in Iran's Sunni areas is development, is creating job opportunities so that Iran's Sunni community remains Iranian and does not answer the call of a terrorist organization like Daesh.
And you bring up an interesting point, though, and I'm going to raise this now with Ahmed in the studio. The fact that this could happen, that these fringe elements, if I can call them that, were present in Iran and somehow overlooked by a very serious security apparatus that exists in Iran. How were they able to get through security in this country?
Based on the information we have in hand, we could have three different case scenarios for the operation that happened in Tehran. One of them is what the other two guests are speaking about, that it's the Iranian version of Daesh that has done it, and I believe the clear message was to drive a wedge between the two main powers, the Sunni and the Shia powers, the Saudi Arabia and Iran, that may trigger more fiery statements between both of them that may lead to a real military confrontation between the two powers. And that is because already Daesh has been pushed back in Iraq and is going to be defeated in Raqqa. So the only way is to create this kind of chaos in the whole region after they're defeated in these two strongholds. That's from the one hand. That's why they did it in Tehran. And that's the first time, as the other two guests said, in 30 years. On the other hand, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, who accused the Saudi Arabia of supporting this and of backing the rebels rebels or the revolutionary Arabs or Sunnis inside Iran in order to create this state of chaos in the whole country, in order to push them back from Syria and Iraq. The third one is, though, it's an inside job. Based on some analysts, they say that this is basically to defeat or to make or to show the government, the newly elected president Rouhani, as weak enough. He's trying to disengage from Syria and Iran. This kind of operation is going to push him back. For the security point is, it is interesting when you just look at the scene of the operation. It was on the public sphere of the parliament. It wasn't on the deputy sphere where the main members of the parliament are there, which send clear messages to the Iranian people that have been spoken on the social media. It's mainly the main official representatives of the people who are being securely, tightly secured in the parliament, whereas the public sphere is not tightly secured, and that would built on the idea of the system, I mean the apparatus of the security in the region, how this had happened and how these elements have been able to infiltrate one of the most tightly secured places in Tehran.
Okay. Ali, I want to get your take on Iran's reaction then here, rightly or wrongly, pointing the finger directly at Saudi and its U.S. supporters. Do you fear this could escalate what is already a very serious diplomatic row between Iran and its Gulf neighbors and Qatar?
Iran is already engaged in a war by proxy with some of its neighbors in Syria, to a lesser degree in Afghanistan, and also in Yemen. And of course, such an incident could trigger and deteriorate relations between these countries. What I do hope all countries in the region learn from this experience is that supporting terrorist organizations is not in anyone's interest, because anyone can be the target of such attacks. Such an attack would be a disaster in Saudi Arabia. It would be a disaster in Iran. So it is not in the interest of states to support terrorist organizations. Sooner or later, they will end up themselves being targeted by those same organizations.
Still, though, if the support, so-called support, doesn't come in the form of specific terrorist attacks on national sovereign land, do you fear then it will manifest further in those proxy wars that you refer to specifically in Syria and Yemen?
What I do fear is further spread of those conflicts to new countries in the region. When you have such a long war being fought in Syria, to some degree also in Iraq, there is always the risk of further spread, and it is the responsibility of the large powers, big powers, regional powers, to solve those issues. Whenever such a war begins, it's very, very hard to stop it again.
Fuad, I want to get your take on what you've heard there. And some are saying as well that part of the fallout could be not just the intensifying of the proxy wars that are being fought in countries like Syria and Yemen, and for what Ali thinks could be engage even more countries. Some are saying that this will actually cause the Iranian-Russian alliance to become stronger in order to rebut the now what seems to be the Saudi-US alliance that's building against Qatar and Iran.
The Iranian-Russian alliance is already strong. I don't think we need to have terrorist incidents in Tehran for it to become stronger. Let me say that I strongly disagree with the views of your guest from Washington, trying to say the people that engage in terrorism are Sunnis is an insult to our Sunni population. Iranian Sunnis love their country as much as other segments of the population. In Washington, for many years, we have elements in Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which is a Zionist outlet that is trying to follow the policy of divide and conquer, pitting Shias against Sunnis, trying to justify terrorism by making arguments that have no validity. What we saw in Saudi Arabia was an alliance between the Wahhabi sect represented by the Saudi clan and Trump administration in the US government. This alliance between Wahhabis and the American imperialists goes back for many decades. And instead of talking about this fact, the fact that the Saudi clan is in power because of the support that they get from Washington, we have Zionist elements in Washington that want to create a sectarian war of Shias and Sunnis and basically change the direction of the opinion that should be made. The Saudis are responsible for Wahhabi mentality, and Washington and President Trump and the US administration is responsible for supporting the Saudis in these adventures that they have, and they're just making money out of Saudis in terms of billions of dollars. So what we are seeing in reality is the form of resistance from both Shias and Sunnis against the US domination and against the domination of the countries that are in line with US foreign policy. As you know, Iran's foreign minister is in Turkey. Iran and Turkish relations have been generally good in the last many years, especially in economic terms. Turkish citizens are generally Sunnis and Iranians are Shias, and they have no problem working with each other.
Okay.
So trying to highlight some sort of difficulty that does not exist is not really good.
Okay. Ahmed, it seemed you heard some kernels of truth in what Fouad was saying with your nods there, unless you meant that to the opposite effect. Go ahead.
No, I do believe that what he's talking about is absolutely true. The point is there is no real religious war on the ground. What we're having now is more political, and that's exactly what Daesh is trying to do. Daesh is attacking some of the rebels who are mainly Sunni. They're attacking even, they have target groups. They're declaring some of the Sunni rebels in Syria as terrorists, as kafir, as infidels. So the point of creating this more sectarian animosity in the whole region is more an agenda that is going to take the whole region into more uncertainty, into more turmoil, and make it more turbulent as more than the way it is. That's a very valid point I agree with, and that's, if you just look at the messages you have from the terror attack that Daesh is doing, not only now in this region, but also all over the world, it's a clear message that terror is going to hit everywhere, regardless of the religion, regardless of any other considerations you may think of. That's why the whole world, whether they like it or not, they should sit together and find a political solution to what's going on here in this region. Otherwise, the backlash of Daesh is going to hit everywhere, as I told you.
Okay, then speaking of reaction, Ali, let me ask you what you made of Trump's reaction to this attack. There was a certain level of, can I call it sympathy, expressed before actually just saying, well, you kind of had it coming. How does that set the tone for relations going forward?
Well, the U.S. President's words and statements, I think, talk for themselves. I do not see any reason to further comment them. But to the honorable guest from Tehran, I must say that you are misrepresenting my viewpoints and maybe intentionally misunderstanding my viewpoints. If you do an objective analysis of each of the perpetrators, the terrorists of the attacks in Tehran, you would find out that they belong to the Sunni minority in Iran. What I was trying to explain is that the Iranian government, most unfortunately, has always used a policy of iron fist against any activity, Sunni political activity and insurgency in the periphery regions of Iran, rather than thinking of how to create jobs in those areas, how to promote a better life for those people living in Iran's periphery regions, so that they do not fall victim to the propaganda of a terrorist organization like Daesh. This is the point that I was trying to make.
Okay, Fouad, your response then?
Yes, yes. What your guest in Washington said is very inaccurate. He is following the talking points that has caused a lot of difficulties in this part of the world, trying to have Shias and Sunnis fight so the Israeli government can have a good time. And you see Mr. Netanyahu is laughing very hard because the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia are making Iran an enemy instead of having Israel as an enemy. The Washington Institute is called the Likud think tank. They come up with these ideas and they produce inaccurate information.
Mr. Izzadi, forgive me.
Sunni
Mr. Izzadi, forgive me that I am
in Iranian Majlis. We have. Let me finish. I did not interrupt you. I did not interrupt you. Let me finish. Let me finish.
Sir,
no. What you said is inaccurate. We have Iranian Sunni members in the Iranian parliament.
Unfortunately,
we have Iranian Sunni members in the Assembly of Experts.
Actually, we can't hear either of you
propagating is Zionist propaganda designed to create mischief in this part of the world. And people are realizing what you are doing. So this type of propaganda you're engaging in is not really going to work out. And interrupting truth is not going to really work out. The Sunnis and Shias hate terrorism, and accusing the Sunni population of Iran in engaging in terrorism is a crime by itself.
Okay, Ali, I've got about 20 seconds for you to respond. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I'm not an affiliate of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. I work for the Atlantic Council. And I'm asking you a very simple question. Do you know what the unemployment rate is in Sistan and Baluchistan
You used to
region?
Work there,
or in Kurdistan,
doing the same thing
or
at
in Turkmenistan?
You're going through Zionist propaganda points, and this is not going to work out anymore. I'm sorry to tell you.
Sir, your approach is insulting. You are not engaging in a discussion. You are engaging in propaganda warfare.
Okay, Ahmed, quickly before we go, I'd just like to get your final thoughts on what you think actually lies ahead for the region, given the events of the last few days.
In theory, what the guest is speaking about is something very beautiful, very promising. But when it comes to practice, what Iran is doing, what the Saudi Arabia is doing is something completely different. As I told you, these two major rivals in the region, as far as they're dealing with each other as enemies, we're going to see more terrorist attacks in both countries. I don't believe that this kind of attacks are just going to be in Tehran or in Saudi Arabia. You're going to see different terrorist attacks in the whole region, as far as these two main bodies are not considered themselves as political rivals, rather they're enemies.
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. I think we'd need an entire hour for both of you to hash out in Tehran, Ali Alfoni in Washington, and here in the studio, Ahmed Al-Barai. Thanks all three of you for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still to come, are NATO allies, Turkey and Germany, about to see a widening rift? And is the EU refugee quota system a false promise ready to collapse? The Czech Republic has announced it will not accept any more refugees despite previous pledges. They joined Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia in shutting their doors to asylum seekers, claiming it's all about security concerns. But the European Commission isn't taking the move lightly, warning it could sanction member states who don't adhere to their EU refugee quota. But with most of Eastern Europe now saying no to refugees, there are concerns other countries will follow suit. So is the European experiment in sharing the responsibility of caring for refugees proving to be a failure? Natalie Pohonen has more.
The summer of 2015 was marked by a wave of humanity, desperately reaching out for European shores. Italian and Greek authorities were overwhelmed, and EU leaders drew up a plan to share the burden across member states. 160,000 asylum seekers from Syria, Iraq and Eritrea were to be distributed throughout the bloc. The deal was done in September 2015. Fast forward to May, and only about 18,500 people have been resettled. The plan expires in September. The Czech Republic has become the latest country to announce it's out of the deal. It has taken in 12 of the 2,691 refugees it was allocated in the quota. But this week announced, due to the aggravated security situation and the dysfunctionality of the whole system, the government approved a proposal to halt this system. The lack of solidarity for the plan is unlikely to come as a surprise to the EU. Along with Poland, Slovakia and Hungary, the Czech Republic has voiced its concerns that the quota is not a solution to the refugee crisis. The EU says member states who won't take their share could face financial penalties.
A Polska również nigdy nie zgodzi się na szantaż i nie zgodzi się na takie dyktowanie takich warunków. My mówimy jasno, że polityka migracyjna, która do tej pory została przyjęta w Unii Europejskiej, nie sprawdziła się.
For them, the issue was about the right to decide who comes to their nations. In May, Hungary and Slovakia launched legal action against the quota system in the European Court of Justice, adding another level of complexity to the EU's attempt for a political solution to a very human problem. The reallocation plan has just months to go. And since it was drawn up, hundreds of thousands of refugees have continued to come to Europe. But if a home can't be found for even a fraction of those who already made it to shore, what hope is there for a long-term solution to the crisis? Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss the issues surrounding the EU refugee quota, I'm joined now in the studio by our very own Natalie Pohonen. And from Budapest, Kitty McKinsey. She is the Senior Communications Officer at UNHCR. Thank you both so much for joining us. Kitty, let me start with you. The EU is only threatening sanctions against those countries who haven't taken at least 1% of their quota. 1%. In the case of the Czech Republic, there were 2,600. They've only taken 12. If it's such a struggle to only get a dozen refugees accepted, it really sounds like the whole program is just hopeless.
The UN Refugee Agency was not a party to this agreement in the first place, but obviously we have an interest in seeing refugees, asylum seekers treated fairly. This is a relocation scheme, as the report mentioned, to have asylum seekers taken from Greece and Italy, which are bearing a huge brunt simply because of the geographic position where they're located, and have them sent to other EU countries where their cases would be heard, where it would be decided if they were refugees. What's even more worrying to us in the Czech Republic is that the resettlement program, which is a protection program for refugees who already are recognized and need special protection, that the Czech Republic has put that on hold also, or has abandoned it for this year. And it's very, very unfortunate that the needs of desperate people who had to flee their homes because of war, persecution, is being caught up in all this political rhetoric.
It is unfortunate. And Natalie, you were on the ground in Hungary looking at this issue. Why do you think it is? Why are they so vehemently rejecting helping some of the people that are most in need on this planet?
I think the argument from a Hungarian perspective, at least, from the government's perspective, is that they really weren't properly consulted when this plan was devised in 2015. They feel like this was forced upon them and that Brussels had no right to tell them who they should be taking in. Many Hungarians I spoke with who live on that border with Serbia felt some compassion for the people who were crossing, who were fleeing from war. But they were also very concerned that these people coming through without security checks, that they didn't know where they were from or whether they would even stay in Hungary. And for them, it is about being able to make that decision about who gets to come to Hungary, who gets to stay there, and not this rhetoric of having Brussels implement something and impose it on the Hungarian people. There are many Hungarians who disagree with that prospect as well, but the governing party Fidesz and the nationalist party Jobbik, the second largest party in the Hungarian parliament, both say that this should be a Hungarian decision, and irrespective of the difficulties and dangers facing these people, it's not Hungary's issue to deal with them in Hungary.
Still, though, it's never going to be a flawless process when millions of refugees are thrown onto the scene within a matter of just months. This is the biggest refugee crisis since World War II. And if anyone should understand, Hungary should get it. They had millions of their own refugees running during World War II itself. So what is it in their mentality that they can't see a little bit of their own history in what these refugees are going through now?
That's a question I put to people there, and their argument is that the times have changed completely, that those people who fled from Hungary after the revolution later stayed where they went to, their first destination choice, perhaps it was Germany. They became doctors, they became engineers, they settled. They weren't using Germany as a third-party country to go through. The other thing that has changed over that period of time now is we have this discussion around terrorism, and certainly in Hungary this is a big part of the media dynamic there. The word migrant is considered a dirty word almost. Quite often when stories are told about refugees in Hungary, it's linked to people who have been involved in acts of terrorism. And that fear campaign, that scare campaign is something that many Hungarians have identified with. They do have sympathy for people, but they're also concerned about their own safety, and that is primarily becoming a key issue for them. And it's very hard for the agencies working with asylum seekers to try and change that narrative because there's no air given to it there.
Kitty, let me ask you, do you think security concerns serves as a good enough excuse here, or does this, as many people have said, just smack of racism?
Every government has a right to protect its borders, and the UN Refugee Agency supports this. One of the really good ways to know who's on your territory is to have a functioning asylum system, and that's why we've tried to work with Hungary to build up the asylum system, but unfortunately Hungary is going in the opposite direction, and a lot of these countries are trying to demonize some of the most vulnerable people, some of the people who are fleeing from war, persecution, attacks. And so it would really be much better to try to, if you want to know who these people are, to have a functioning asylum system to process their claims. I would also like to back up what your correspondent in the studio said, that the people in Hungary, which is where I'm living, who come in contact with refugees and even migrants are the most sympathetic. There's important to make a distinction between government rhetoric and the attitudes of the people. People who come in, Hungarians who come in contact with refugees generally are very, very sympathetic. They understand the needs, they understand what forces people to flee. It's the people who never come in contact with refugees who are most susceptible to propaganda.
And Kitty, there is a case to make for those who haven't had the exposure to refugees, and that for decades and decades, under the rule of the Soviet Union, there were no refugees. There was no immigration or integration. So this is an entirely new concept to them. Can the UNHCR perhaps help give them that exposure they might need, so that more people you encounter are the ones that do become sympathetic because they have actually met immigrants and refugees?
Well, we've tried this a couple of years ago for World Refugee Day, which is coming up on June 20th. We ran a campaign where we introduced the public to refugees, and we had a campaign along the line of mother, chef, refugee, soccer player, sorry, he wasn't a soccer player, I've forgotten the sport, but, you know, people who were really well integrated. People want to stay in Hungary when they have the right conditions and they can contribute to the economy. It's just that very often they don't find a friendly reception. And you said that during the years of communism that Hungary was not very open. This is true, but it was also a police state. And what we find a little hard to understand is why people want to go back to building walls. In the 21st century, the trend is to, you know, the big open world with no walls. It's a little difficult to understand why Hungary is intent on erecting walls again.
Where do you think this all leaves these refugees? Where do they feel they're accepted? Where do they want to go? After hearing this kind of rhetoric from Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, etc., do they want to be relocated to these countries?
Since I'm not in Greece or Italy, I can't tell you that. What I can tell you, and I'm just, excuse me for concentrating on the Czech Republic, but in that case, the rhetoric is one thing and the reality is slightly different, because the integration over the years has been really excellent. The government has supported the integration programs. That's why it's so unfortunate that they're talking one story, but they're actually quietly practicing another. It's true in Hungary that there's neither good integration nor good rhetoric. But I cannot tell you how people in Greece and Italy are feeling right now, because I'm not there. But it would be an important signal to them if the countries in this part of the world would step up to the plate and take the refugees that they promised to take, because it's a small number. If these countries took even the numbers they promised, the Czech Republic has taken 12 against almost 2,700 it promised. You know, it's still a very small number against the population of that country, of some 15 million. So it's really, it would still be a very small number.
Natalie, go ahead.
I think I have to back up what Kitty is saying there too. But the other point, I think, to broaden this out, it's not just these 4 countries that we've been talking about today. It is all of the countries in the EU. All of the members agreed to this voting bloc. They all agreed to take in this volume of 160,000 refugees back from 2015. Since that time, we've had 1.6 million refugees come to EU shores. So if the solution can't be found for 160,000, the 1.6 million who've arrived here now, I think, are in very dire straits. And I think the EU has found itself in a very untenable position going forward.
Not a positive prospect. Okay, Natalie, I'm going to give you the final word. Natalie Pohonen and Kitty McKinsey joining us there from Budapest. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Also ich sehe das sehr lokalisiert, dieses eine Thema, und das wird jetzt nach Jordanien verlagert, und dann werden wir dort die Bedingungen haben, die wir brauchen für unsere Soldatinnen und Soldaten.
Well, it's been NATO's Middle East base of operations for decades. In the south of Turkey, Incirlik Air Base has illustrated the strength and unity of the alliance from its airfields. But now the bond that built a once solid partnership is in jeopardy. Germany has announced that its troops will withdraw from Incirlik. The pullout comes on the heels of Turkey denying German lawmakers permission to visit German soldiers stationed at the base, saying they have no obligation to do so. Now, the German government has said its troops at Incirlik will move to a base in Jordan. Turkey has responded by saying if they want to leave, it's up to them. The withdrawal comes as relations between Turkey and Germany have soured in recent months over Germany's perceived hostility toward Turkish politicians and security concerns. Well, joining me now to discuss this further is Turkey's former Minister for EU Affairs, Egemen Bagis. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me begin by asking you, why are Turkey and Germany here, a NATO ally, pulling troops out of an air base from where they're fighting a common and very dangerous enemy?
Well, this is a reflection of many actions and reactions. Unfortunately, Germany has been acting strange lately in her relations with Turkey. As you know, Turkey went through a bloody coup attempt past July. On July 15th, some members of a clan who were hiding their true identity in the Turkish military hijacked some Turkish warplanes, tanks and helicopters, and they bombed our own parliament. They killed more than 250 people overnight, and they tried to take down the democratically elected government through undemocratic means. Unfortunately, some of those assassins, some of those terrorists, some of those violent former members of the military have found safe havens in Germany. Some of the prosecutors who tried to use a legal coup attempt to take down the government has found safe havens in Germany. And unfortunately, for years, Turkey has been demanding the extradition of PKK terrorists in addition to these FETÖ terrorists, but Germany has not been very cooperative. And some of the German politicians, some of the members of the German parliament who have sought permission to enter this base, which is a Turkish property, have made such outrageous statements and claims against Turkey, against Turkey's elected representatives, that Turkey has claimed that, well, we need to check the list of those German parliamentarians who want to come and visit the German soldiers. Turkey has nothing against Germany or the German nation or the German soldiers who are based in Turkey. But we have an issue with those statements made by some German politicians who are geared towards insulting and offending Turkey and the Turkish nation.
Okay.
And we raised this issue numerous times with Chancellor Merkel and the German authorities, and they have not responded positively. And they said, well, we would withdraw from Incirlik. We said they are more than welcome to visit other bases like the one in Konya, which is another NATO base. And they chose, no, they insisted on this Incirlik base. And until now, I don't think a settlement has been reached.
It hasn't. And there are some analysts that are now saying that Germany and Turkey are on this slippery slope whereby hurt pride and conflicting narratives, let's put it that way, are manifesting in ways that could produce very dangerous global implications whereby everyone loses. Do you share any of that sentiment?
Well, Turkey and Germany are the most important strategic partners of each other. There are more than 4 million Turkish citizens who live in Germany, and they have not been there recently. They've been there for like 60 years. So we have the largest diaspora of Turkey in Germany. Most of those 4 million people are also German citizens. They are taxpayers, they are business owners, they are employees, they are students, and they are engineers, and they vote in Germany as well. They're voters. Our trade volume with Germany is probably one of the highest in the world. We get more German tourists than any other nations. Neither Germany nor Turkey has the luxury to put an end to this relationship overnight. But as you said, both nations are very proud, and both governments are trying to protect their national interests. Especially Turkey, having gone through a very traumatic coup attempt in July, is trying to ensure that our allies within NATO, who have promised, according to NATO agreement, to be there for us when we need help, are actually there for us when we do need help, which is today. Because we're trying to fight a very dangerous terrorist organization called FETÖ. And the leader of that organization happens to reside in Pennsylvania, United States, another NATO ally. And some of his followers, who are responsible for hundreds of casualties in Turkey, have found safe havens in Germany. And they have been seeking asylum, and German courts have issued political asylum to those individuals. And that is adding insult to injury, and that's hurting us. But I'm hoping that the leadership, our foreign ministers, our prime ministers, the Chancellor of Germany, would get together and resolve those issues, because both countries need each other.
They do. And Egemen, another vital part of both Turkey and Germany's national interests is the fight against other terrorist extremists, including Daesh. Do you think that this dispute over German soldiers being in Incirlik air base actually puts the fight against Daesh at risk and effectively gives these terrorists an upper hand, knowing that NATO no longer has the unity to fight together against this common threat?
I definitely hope not, because the fight against Daesh is very critical for the stability of the world. We have soldiers fighting against Daesh, so-called ISIS, in Syria, in Iraq, around the Turkish border as we speak. And they're putting up a great fight against these barbaric terrorists who are defaming the good name of Islam. Our allies, however, have chosen to be in these military bases, giving logistical support and equipment support, but we would like to see them fighting with us shoulder to shoulder against these terrorists in Iraq and Syria and other parts of the Middle East. Unfortunately, the developments in the Middle East are not very promising. What's happening between Saudi Arabia and Iran and Qatar and United Arab Emirates, the whole region is approaching a chaos. And the only party which would benefit out of this chaos would be the Daesh terrorists. So I'm hoping that Turkey and Germany, along with all other members of NATO, would put their differences aside and try to make compromises and ensure a real, sincere cooperation in the fight against terrorism. The fight against terrorism should not have any discrimination either. Unfortunately, in the last 30 years, there has not been a single PKK terrorist that has been extradited from any European Union country into Turkey. Although we abolished the capital punishment, the death penalty, for this purpose, we still have not received any PKK members. When we request the extradition, they always claim that either the paperwork is not correct, the translations are not well prepared, the documents are missing. There's always something, an excuse. But when we demand the extradition of a petty criminal, a rapist, a thief, a killer, a murderer, somehow all the paperwork is perfect, the documentation is great, and that criminal is extradited to Turkey immediately. There is a double standard.
I was just going to say,
the international community has to put an end to double standards in the way they treat terrorism.
There is perhaps a double standard, and we know that, that Turkey is fed up. So let me ask you as a final question here, how does this get better? If you held the magic wand to tell each party involved exactly what practical steps to take to resolve this, so that NATO can be unified once again, so that a common front, the strongest front possible, can be formed to fight the terrorist threats that exist on the border between Turkey and Syria, what would you do?
The magic word is sincerity. We have to be sincere with each other. Germany has to say, okay, you want these members of Fethullah terrorist organization to be extradited? I need more proof. And Turkey should share all the documentation on these cases with our allies. As far as the PKK is concerned, what is bothering Germany? They should be very open and transparent with us because we're their partners, we are their allies. When the time comes to ask for help, we should seek their help and they should seek our help, not the terrorists. And we have to be very open, sincere, and transparent with each other. And we have to realize that what unites us is a lot greater than what divides us. So we have to focus on those concepts like democracy, human rights, freedom of speech, mutual cooperation, stability, and the fight against terrorism as the values that unite us. And we have to focus on them, and we have to embrace those values.
Do you think Germany and Turkey can get there? Because at the very least, the tone has been respectful and cordial.
I think, yes, we can get there. Because as I said, there are more than 4 million Turkish Germans who represent a great bridge between the two countries. There's a huge trade volume. There is a very important tourism element in the relationship. Put all these together. Yes, there are some different approaches, but working with your ally, with the government of an ally country, should always be better and easier and smoother than working with a terrorist organization and their representatives.
Okay, Egemen Bagis.
Common sense has to prevail here.
Common sense will hopefully prevail. Egemen Bagis, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.